There will come a day quiet, ordinary, unannounced when the avoidant finally realizes something that changes everything. Not because someone explained it perfectly, not because they were confronted or forced to feel, but because the absence becomes louder than any argument that ever existed. That day is the day. They realize the super empath was never weak. You see, the mistake was never loving too much. The mistake was assuming that someone who stayed, who forgave, who softened their voice instead of raising it must somehow lack power. But strength is not always loud. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones who choose peace over chaos, clarity over conflict, and dignity over desperation. The super empath did not stay because they were afraid to leave. They stayed because they saw potential. They stayed because they believed in growth, in healing, in the idea that love, real love, creates safety where fear once lived. That was not weakness. That was courage. Avoidance often confuses emotional availability with threat. Intimacy feels like loss of control. Consistency feels suffocating. And so distance becomes the shield. Silence becomes the strategy. Withdrawal becomes the illusion of power. But here is the truth. No avoidant can outrun forever. Distance only works when someone is still chasing you across it. The moment the super empath stops chasing, something shifts. Because when empath leaves, they don't leave loudly. They don't burn bridges. They don't seek revenge. They simply remove their energy. And energy, once gone, reveals what it was holding together all along. The avoidant begins to notice the quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the empty kind. The kind where no one asks how they are and actually means it. The kind where no one sees beneath the surface. The kind where distractions no longer drown out the truth. And suddenly, the narrative collapses. That patience that once felt guaranteed now feels rare. That understanding that once felt endless now feels irreplaceable. That love that was always steady now feels like something sacred that was mishandled. This is when realization arrives not as guilt, but as clarity. The super empath didn't leave because they stopped loving. They left because they finally loved themselves enough to stop shrinking. They left because they realized that explaining their worth to someone committed to misunderstanding. It was no longer holy work, it was self-betrayal. And here's the divine principle hidden inside all of this. Love is not meant to be proven through endurance of pain. Love is meant to be reciprocated through presence, effort, and truth. When the super empath chose themselves, it wasn't abandonment. It was alignment. And the avoidant, they are left with the lesson that real strength isn't found in disappearing. It's found in staying present when it's uncomfortable. Real power isn't in withholding love, it's in being brave enough to give it consistently. By the time the avoidant understands this, the super empath is no longer available to be convinced. Not because they're cold, but because they're whole. And that is the final truth. The super empath was never weak. They were just strong enough to walk away without needing to be chased, validated, or understood. And that kind of strength always reveals itself. Eventually, the idea that patience equals weakness is one of the most damaging misunderstandings in modern relationships. The super empath's love was never fragile, passive, or desperate. It was deliberate. It was chosen. And it required a level of inner strength that most people never have to access because most people leave the moment. Love asks them to stretch. Patience in the hands of a super empath is not the absence of boundaries. It is the presence of emotional mastery. It is the ability to feel deeply without reacting impulsively, to stay grounded when misunderstood, and to respond with clarity instead of chaos. That kind of control is not soft, it is powerful. It takes strength to pause instead of punish, to listen instead of withdraw, to hold space instead of closing the door at the first sign of discomfort. What the avoidant often fails to recognize is that the super empath was not enduring out of fear of loss. They were observing. They were learning. They were giving time for growth to show itself. This is a crucial distinction. Weakness clings because it fears being alone. Strength waits because it knows its worth does not expire. The super empath's patience was rooted in self-trust, not self-abandonment. There is a misconception that the person who stays longer is somehow less powerful than the one who leaves first. In truth, Walking away is easy when you are emotionally detached. Staying present when you care deeply, while still maintaining your integrity, is the harder path. The super empath chose that path because they believed that love, when handled with responsibility, can heal what avoidance tries to escape. Their patience was not blind optimism. It was informed hope. They saw the wounds behind the withdrawal. They understood that silence often masks fear, not indifference. And instead of weaponizing that knowledge, they responded with compassion. That is not weakness. That is emotional intelligence operating at its highest level. Strength is often misjudged by those who measure power through control. The avoidant may believe that pulling away gives them the upper hand, but what they don't see is that the super empath was never trying to win. They were trying to connect, and connection requires vulnerability, presence, and the courage to remain open even when it would be safer to close off. Patience in this context is love without ego. It is the refusal to make someone else's fear about your worth. It is the quiet confidence that says, I will show up fully, and if that is not met, I will not beg for reciprocity. That is not passivity. That is self-respect expressed calmly. The super empath's patience was also a test, though not in a manipulative way. It was an invitation for the other person to rise, to meet them at a level of emotional honesty and consistency. Time was given not because the super empath lacked options, but because they valued depth over speed. They understood that real bonds are built, not rushed. And here is the part that is often missed. Patience has an expiration date when it is powered by strength. The super empath was not endlessly waiting. They were watching for alignment between words and actions. Each moment of patience was also a moment of evaluation. Each act of understanding was paired with an internal question: is this relationship growing, or am I shrinking? When the answer became clear, the patience ended not in anger, but in resolve. That is why the eventual departure feels so shocking to the avoidant. They mistook calm for compliance, understanding for tolerance, and kindness for weakness. They didn't realize that the same strength that allowed the super empath to stay was the very strength that would allow them to leave without drama, threats, or second chances. The super empath's love was strength disguised as patience. And only when that patience is gone does the full weight of that strength become visible. Avoidance often wears the mask of independence, but beneath it lives a deep misunderstanding of emotional safety. To the avoidant, closeness can feel like control, consistency can feel like pressure, and being seen can feel like exposure. When someone offers steady presence, honest communication, and emotional reliability, the avoidant nervous system doesn't always register that as care. It registers it as risk. This is how emotional safety becomes confused with loss of freedom. The super empath's desire to connect, to talk things through, to build something secure is not heard as love. It is misinterpreted as an attempt to contain. And so the avoidant pulls back, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to remain close without feeling trapped. Silence then becomes the chosen language, not aggressive silence, but distancing silence. Delayed replies, withheld vulnerability, emotional ambiguity. To the avoidant, this silence feels like control restored. It creates space, and space feels safe. In that space, they believe they are protecting themselves from being overwhelmed, from expectations, from the possibility of failing someone who wants more than they know how to give. But silence is not neutral. Silence always communicates something. And over time, silence stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling like loss. The super empath initially tries to understand the silence. They don't immediately assume rejection. They look for context, for wounds, for reasons beneath the behavior. They ask questions gently. They soften their APR. Ouch! They reduce their needs to avoid triggering retreat. Not because they don't have needs, but because they value harmony and hope understanding will create safety. Here is where the tragedy quietly unfolds. What the avoidant perceives as control, the empath's desire for clarity, reassurance, and presence is actually an invitation to co-create safety. But the avoidant, conditioned to survive emotionally alone, mistakes that invitation as a threat to autonomy. They believe that needing someone equals losing power, and so they disappear in small ways, convincing themselves they are maintaining balance. Yet with every withdrawal, the bond weakens. At first, the silence feels manageable. Then it feels awkward. Eventually, it feels heavy. The messages stop coming, not because the empath is punishing, but because they are listening to what the silence is telling them. Silence teaches. It reveals patterns. It clarifies what words once blurred. This is the moment when avoidance backfires. The control the avoidant thought. They had the ability to come and go. To engage on their terms only existed because someone was willing to wait. When the super empath stops reaching into the silence, the dynamic collapses. The space that once felt safe now feels empty. The quiet that once felt empowering now echoes, and that echo forces awareness. The avoidant begins to realize that emotional safety was never about distance. It was about consistency. About knowing someone would be here, not to trap them, but to choose them. And now that presence is gone. Not dramatically, not angrily, just absent. That absence is when truth arrives. The empath was not trying to control the relationship. They were trying to stabilize it. They were trying to create a rhythm where both people could breathe, speak, and belong. The silence that once felt protective is now exposed as avoidance. Not strength, not independence, but fear of being fully known. And fear, when left unchallenged, always isolates. The realization doesn't come with instant regret. It comes slowly, through moments where the avoidant reaches for connection and finds no response. Through distractions that no longer distract. Through a growing understanding that emotional safety is not something you escape from, it is something you build, brick by brick, with presence and courage. Silence in the end becomes the teacher. It shows the avoidant what they lost not by leaving, but by withdrawing. And only then do they understand that what they once called control was actually the slow erosion of something real. Consistency is not exciting to the avoidant mind at first. It doesn't create adrenaline. It doesn't come with emotional highs and lows that distract from inner discomfort. Consistency is calm, predictable, and steady, and that very steadiness can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling to someone who has learned to associate love with distance, inconsistency, or emotional uncertainty. For the super empath, consistency is a sacred language. It is how trust is built without force. It is how safety is communicated without words. Showing up when it's easy and when it's inconvenient. Being the same person in private and in public. Letting actions align with promises. This is not accidental behavior. It is intentional integrity, but to the avoidant, inconsistency often feels more natural. It allows them to regulate closeness without having to explain their inner world. Pulling back when things feel too intimate, reappearing when the fear subsides. Inconsistency becomes a way to manage connection while avoiding vulnerability. And because the super empath initially adapts, the avoidant assumes this rhythm is sustainable. What they don't realize is that consistency is not optional for secure love. It is foundational. Every time the super empath reaches out and receives partial presence, something registers internally. Not anger. Not accusation, awareness. The body keeps score. The heart notices patterns even when the mind makes excuses. And slowly, the empath begins to understand that love without reliability becomes a form of emotional erosion, disappearance, even subtle, is not neutral. Missed calls, unclear intentions, emotional unavailability disguised as busyness. These moments communicate something powerful. I am here when it suits me. To the avoidant, this may feel like self-protection. To the empath, over time, it feels like instability. Consistency, on the other hand, says you can lean here. It creates an emotional home. And when that home is repeatedly left unattended, the one who maintains it eventually stops lighting the lamp. The avoidant often underestimates the cumulative impact of their disappearance because it doesn't come with dramatic conflict. There are no explosive arguments, no ultimatums. The super empath doesn't threaten to leave. They simply adjust. They grow quieter. They stop initiating. They begin redirecting their energy back to themselves. This is not manipulation. It is self-regulation. Consistency is how secure love survives discomfort. It doesn't run when emotions rise. It doesn't vanish when conversations get real. It stays long enough for repair. And repair is where intimacy deepens. The avoidant, however, may equate repair with exposure. Talking things through feels like standing without armor. So they choose disappearance instead, believing distance will reset the tension. But distance does not repair. It delays. Each disappearance teaches the super empath something important, that they are carrying the emotional continuity alone. And no matter how strong or compassionate someone is, they cannot sustain a connection where consistency flows in only one direction. The truth is, the super empath was never asking for perfection. They weren't asking for constant availability or emotional intensity. They were asking for predictability, for follow-through, for the reassurance that presence would not vanish the moment things required effort. Consistency is the quiet promise that says you matter even when it's inconvenient. And when that promise is broken repeatedly, love begins to detach not as punishment, but as protection. By the time the avoidant realizes what disappearance has cost them, the super empath has already translated the message. They have learned that inconsistency is not a phase to endure, it is information to honor. And so they stop waiting for consistency to arrive and instead become consistent with themselves. That is when the avoidant feels the loss most clearly, not because someone left suddenly, but because someone stopped compensating for their absence. The super empath does not leave in a moment of rage. There is no dramatic explosion, no final argument designed to wound or win. Their exit is almost imperceptible at first, because it begins internally long before it ever becomes visible. It begins the moment self-respect starts whispering more clearly than hope. For a long time, hope is loud. Hope says they're trying in their own way. Hope says, if I explain this better, they'll understand. Hope says, love means patience. And the super empath listens to hope because they believe in growth, healing, and the power of connection. But self-respect is patient too. It waits quietly, observing patterns, measuring cost. Every time the super empath communicates a need and it goes unmet, something shifts. Not outwardly. Inwardly, they don't stop caring. Boo. They stop abandoning themselves to prove that care. They begin to notice how often they adjust while the other remains unchanged. How often they make room while their own needs are minimized. Self-respect doesn't shout, it accumulates. The quiet leaving starts with emotional boundaries, less explaining, less overfunctioning, less chasing clarity from someone committed to ambiguity. The super empath is still kind, still present, but no longer contorting themselves to maintain connection. This is the stage most avoidants don't notice because there is no confrontation, but it is the most important phase because it is irreversible. When self-respect speaks louder than hope, the super empath stops negotiating their worth. They realize that love is not proven by endurance alone. That devotion without reciprocity slowly becomes self-betrayal. And they understand a divine truth that changes everything. You are not meant to suffer to be chosen. This realization doesn't harden them. It clarifies them. They begin choosing responses instead of reactions, silence instead of pursuit, observation instead of explanation, not as punishment, but as alignment. They are listening to reality rather than potential. And reality is speaking clearly now. The avoidant often misreads this phase as peace. They think things have settled. The empath isn't pushing anymore. There's no emotional demand. What they don't realize is that the empath hasn't found peace. In the relationship, they found peace within themselves. And that peace no longer depends on the connection. Leaving quietly is an act of profound self-trust. It means accepting that no amount of love can replace someone else's willingness to show up. It means letting go without needing the other person to agree, understand, or validate the decision. The super empath doesn't need closure because clarity has already been achieved. This is why there is no announcement. When they finally leave physically or emotionally, it feels sudden to the avoidant. But it is anything but sudden. It is the result of many small moments where self-respect was chosen over self-sacrifice. Each unreturned effort, each dismissed feeling, each unanswered reach built the resolve. The super empath leaves quietly because they no longer need to be heard by someone who is never listening. They no longer need to prove the depth of their love. They know it. And they know something else now too. Staying where you are consistently unseen teaches others how to treat you. Walking away without bitterness is not weakness. It is strength refined. It is love redirected inward, where it can finally nourish instead of deplete. The super empath does not burn bridges because they don't need to destroy what they've outgrown. By the time the avoidant notices the absence, the super empath is already anchored in, say, a left respect. And that anchor holds stronger than any hope ever did. Loss is a teacher the avoidant rarely anticipates because they are used to controlling proximity and minimizing emotional exposure. To them, distance feels safe, absence feels manageable, and silence feels like autonomy. But loss arrives in a way that cannot be ignored. It is slow, subtle, and undeniable, and it has a clarity that avoidance can never manufacture. The super empath does not leave in anger or spite. They leave because the patterns of disregard, inconsistency, and emotional unavailability have reached a point where staying no longer serves love, truth, or self-respect. And when they leave, the avoidant is confronted with something they have never truly faced before, the reality that connection cannot be taken for granted, and love cannot be postponed indefinitely. Loss does not always arrive dramatically. It often begins with small absences, a missed call, a quiet weekend, a lack of check-ins. At first, the avoidant rationalizes it, tells themselves it's temporary, that the empath will return. But each moment absence is a mirror reflecting a deeper truth. The empath's love was not weak, their patience not endless. They were choosing themselves in ways the avoidant never anticipated. And slowly, the void grows. Not because the avoidant lacks independence, but because they begin to feel the weight of what was never fully received. Emotional consistency, understanding, presence, these things can not be manufactured after they are gone. The avoidant experiences an absence that is not merely physical, but spiritual. It is the absence of someone who held space with integrity, someone who loved without losing themselves. When loss arrives, it is uncomfortable. Avoidance can no longer be justified by the illusion of control. The empty spaces once ignored begin to echo with meaning. Every moment when the empath was patient, every time they gave and received little in return, every act of quiet understanding becomes visible in retrospect. It becomes clear that what the avoidant once dismissed as weakness was actually extraordinary strength. Loss forces reflection. It asks questions that no avoidance can answer. Why did I take this for granted? Why did I mistake patience for compliance? Why did I confuse kindness with weakness? And it is in these questions that growth begins painfully, humbly, and inevitably. The avoidant realizes that absence is not punishment, but revelation. There is a divine precision to loss. It arrives exactly when the heart is capable of seeing the truth. The avoidant, who once ran from emotional depth, is now confronted by its absence. They begin to recognize that the super empath's presence was not optional, it was transformative. Every word, every gesture, every moment of unwavering care was an investment in a bond that the avoidant was not ready to honor fully. The super empath's leaving teaches a profound principle. Love cannot be forced, nor see. And it be manipulated into recognition. Presence cannot be demanded, nor can understanding be coerced. When the avoidant finally experiences the void, they see that the empath's love was never a liability, it was an opportunity, a gift, a rare and sacred offering that required courage to accept. In the end, loss is both teacher and mirror. It reflects the truth of the past, the choices made, and the realities ignored. And it challenges the avoidant to evolve, to face their own fears, and to recognize that emotional safety is not about absence or control, but about presence, reciprocity, and integrity. By the time the lesson is learned, the super empath has already moved beyond the need for approval or validation. They've honored their own worth, and the avoidant, left with the echoes of what they failed to nurture, finally sees the strength that was always there, the strength, never begged, never wavered, and ultimately never left behind without reason. True power is not loud, flashy, or designed to dominate. True power is quiet, unwavering, and deeply rooted in self-respect. For the super empath, choosing oneself without hatred, revenge, or a need for closure is the ultimate act of strength. It is not an act born from anger or pride, but from understanding that love does not require self-sacrifice to the point of self-erasure. The empath's power lies in their ability to recognize the value of their own emotional well-being and to honor it above all else. When the avoidant withdraws, ignores, or dismisses, it is easy to become entangled in resentment. Many people react to absence with anger, trying to regain control or elicit guilt. But the super empath does not. They know that real strength is not measured by how loud you can assert your importance. It is measured by how peacefully you can honor it. Choosing yourself without animosity is a declaration that your worth is inherent, not contingent on another's recognition. This power requires immense courage. To walk away without malice means letting go of the desire to correct, punish, or demand acknowledgement. It means accepting that the other person may never fully understand the depth of your love, the patience you extended, or the boundaries you upheld. And yet, the super empath walks forward with grace, knowing that their journey is not defined by others' inability to meet them fully. Choosing yourself does not negate compassion. On the contrary, it demonstrates the highest form of empathy. The super empath understands the avoidance, fear, their patterns, and their limitation. They may grieve the disconnect, but they do not let grief consume them. Instead, they transform it into clarity and resolve. They understand that holding on to anger or trying to force understanding only binds them to patterns that weaken rather than strengthen their sense of self. The decision to honor oneself also carries a spiritual principle, the recognition that divine timing orchestrates relationships and that people show up in our lives not always to stay but to teach. The super empath's departure is not a punishment. It is an alignment with truth. It communicates that love is sacred, that boundaries are sacred, and that the highest form of respect is given to oneself first. There is a profound freedom in this choice. Without hatred, there is no burden. Without revenge, there is no lingering attachment to someone who could not meet you fully. Without needing closure, you exist outside the narrative that would otherwise keep you tethered. You move forward unencumbered, anchored in the certainty that your value is not diminished by another's inability to recognize it. The avoidant may misinterpret this calm detachment as indifference, but it is anything but that. It is the most potent expression of power love for oneself, expressed without compromise, and without apology. It is a strength so subtle, yet so absolute, that it leaves indelible impression. Absence becomes revelation. It is in this quiet exit that the avoidant finally understands the weight of what was lost and the depth of the strength they never perceived. Ultimately, choosing yourself without hatred, revenge, or closure is a declaration of autonomy. It is a refusal to let another person's patterns dictate your self-worth. It is a recognition that the only relationship you are guaranteed is the one you have with yourself. The super empath's power lies in the ability to protect that relatio, endship, to honor it, and to allow it to flourish, even when it means walking away from someone who cannot meet them at the same level of authenticity. This is not weakness. This is mastery. This is divine strength in action. And it is the kind of power that transforms lives not through confrontation, but through the unwavering clarity of self-love, integrity, and purposeful alignment with truth. Divine timing is one of the most subtle yet profound forces in human relationships. It is not a concept we can control or manipulate. It moves according to a rhythm that is both patient and precise. For the super empath, understanding this timing is a sacred lesson, one that teaches when to act, when to wait, and when to step back entirely. Every interaction, every withdrawal, every expression of love or boundary occurs, not by accident, but according to a divine alignment that ensures the lesson lands exactly when the heart is ready to perceive it. The avoidant often struggles with timing because they live in a state of emotional urgency. They move according to fear or discomfort, withdrawing when things feel intense, engaging only when convenience aligns with safety, and often missing the subtle cues of love's steadiness. To them, relationships feel like a negotiation of control and space, not an unfolding of deeper understanding. And yet, no matter how much they try to manipulate proximity or influence outcomes, timing has its own authority. The super empath, in contrast, embodies patience and attunement. They understand that love cannot be rushed, that growth cannot be forced, and that the heart's readiness cannot be dictated by desire alone. Every act of kindness, every moment of listening, every expression of care is careful, measured not to coerce, but to create the conditions for genuine connection to flourish. This is not passive waiting. It is active, intentional love expressed with wisdom and discernment. When the avoidant resists, timing takes on a teaching role. Each withdrawal or avoidance is not punishment, it is a mirror. It reflects the truth that emotional availability cannot be faked or bypassed. The super empath recognizes this, adjusting their energy without judgment, allowing the other person's absence to demonstrate lessons that words alone could never convey. They know that forcing understanding or recognition too early only delays real insight. Timing ensures that learning is sustainable, internalized, and transformative. Divine timing also teaches the avoidant about value. It shows them what presence truly means, what patience really looks like, and what it costs when love is taken for granted. They begin to feel the consequences of their avoidance in ways that are inescapable, not as punishment, but as revelation. Every unanswered message, every moment of inattention, every gap in connection becomes a teacher, illustrating that love cannot be manufactured or rushed. It must be nurtured consistently and received consciously. For the super empath, this understanding of timing is liberating. They know that leaving or staying is not dictated by impulse, anger, or desperation. It is dictated by alignment with truth. They recognize when their energy has been invested fully, and when it is time to redirect that energy to themselves or to spaces where reciprocity and respect exist. Divine timing is their ally, ensuring that departure or presence is not reactive, but intentional, not punitive, but instructive, and never hasty, but profoundly precise. This principle also illuminates the greater spiritual lesson. Everything in life unfolds according to a higher order. Attempts to rush outcomes, to demand recognition, or to force growth are always temporary illusions. True clarity, genuine connection, and authentic understanding arise only when both hearts are prepared to perceive, receive, and honor the truth that has been present all along. Timing guarantees that this truth cannot be bypassed. It ensures that lesson land when the mind is ready, the heart is open, and the soul is receptive. By the time the avoidant fully comprehends the depth, patience, and strength of the super empath, divine timing has completed its work. The super empath has acted with integrity. The lesson has unfolded through experience, and the avoidant is faced with clarity they could not have grasped sooner. This is why timing is sacred. It does not prevent growth, it guarantees. It occurs at the moment it will resonate most deeply. Understanding divine timing is also an invitation to humility and acceptance. It teaches that control is an illusion, that love cannot be coerced, that every relational dynamic has a rhythm beyond human manipulation. The super empath trusts this rhythm, allowing it to guide decisions, preserve energy, and honor the sanctity of their own emotional ecosystem. In doing so, they model a love that is both wise and invincible, leaving the avoidant with a reflection they can no longer ignore and a truth that only patience and presence could reveal. Divine timing ensures that the lesson of love, respect, and boundaries is not wasted. It guarantees that awareness emerges at the exact moment the heart is ready, the mind can understand, and the soul can integrate. This is the ultimate gift of timing. It transforms absence into insight, patience into revelation, and love into a principle that transcends weakness, fear, or avoidance. Thank you for your time and trust, wishing you clarity, strength, and endless growth on your journey. Goodbye for now, and may every step forward bring you closer to the peace and wisdom you deserve.